$3 trillion did not vanish overnight by accident. Empires do not collapse in explosions. They collapse in silence. They collapse when money stops moving the way it used to, when capital quietly changes direction, when the system that once felt permanent begins to feel optional. To understand what just happened, you have to forget the headlines. Forget the words war, attack, or retaliation. Those words are emotional. History is not. History is mechanical. And history tells us something uncomfortable. China did not start a financial war. It followed a playbook so old that empires have been collapsing by it for over 500 years. Before there was the dollar, before there were central banks, before there were bond markets and yield curves, there was silver. Not metaphorical silver, real metal, heavy, scarce, irreplaceable. In the 16th century, Spain discovered what every empire dreams of discovering, a way to fund power without producing value. Silver poured out of the Americas in quantities the world had never seen. Entire mountains were hollowed out. Ships crossed oceans heavy with metal. Spain did not need to build factories. It did not need to innovate. It did not need to compete. It had money. And because it had money, the world accepted Spanish dominance. Trade flowed through Spanish currency. Wars were financed with silver. Palaces, armies, and empires were built on the assumption that this river of wealth would never stop. That assumption was wrong. At first, nothing looked broken. Spain was rich beyond imagination. Its currency was trusted everywhere. Other nations needed Spanish silver to trade, to settle accounts, to survive in global commerce. Sound familiar? Then something subtle happened. Spain's rivals did not challenge it directly. They did not attack Madrid. They did not invade its ports. They simply stopped sending silver back. They accepted Spanish currency for goods, labor, and resources, and then they held it. Or worse, they converted it into their own power. The silver flowed out, but it did not return. Spain kept spending as if nothing had changed. This is the part history books often rush past. Collapse does not announce itself. It hides behind normalcy. The markets were open. The ship still sailed. The empire still looked strong. But underneath, the foundation was cracking. Now fast forward 5 centuries. Replace silver with dollars. Replace galleons with treasury bonds. Replace rival kingdoms with central banks. The structure is identical. For over 50 years, the United States has enjoyed the same privilege Spain once did. The ability to fund consumption, power, and global influence, not by producing more, but by issuing the currency everyone else needed. Dollars replaced silver as the bloodstream of global trade. Energy was priced in them, debt was settled in them, reserves were stored in them. This allowed America to do something no other country could: import more than it exported, spend more than it earned, run deficits without immediate consequences. It felt like strength. It was dependence. And like Spain, America began to mistake privilege for permanence. When the dollar became the world's reserve currency, it was backed not by metal but by trust. Trust that the system would remain stable. Trust that the supply would not be abused. Trust that dollars would remain neutral. That trust is what made everything else possible. Then the trust began to erode. It did not happen all at once. It never does. It happened when money was created faster than productivity, when debt replaced growth, when crises were solved not by restructuring but by printing. Every empire does this in its late stage. It chooses the painless solution. It chooses postponement. It chooses illusion. And illusion works until it doesn't. China watched this process unfold for decades, quietly, patiently, not emotionally, historically. This is the mistake most people make when analyzing what just happened. They assume China acted out of hostility, out of aggression, out of ambition. In reality, China acted out of memory. Empires that survive do not attack collapsing systems. They step aside before the collapse begins. When Spain finally realized silver was leaving faster than it was returning, it was already too late. Inflation had taken hold. Debt had metastasized. Confidence had fractured. The empire did not fall in a year. It declined over decades. But the moment the silver stopped circulating properly, the outcome was sealed. Now return to the present. $3 trillion did not vanish. They moved. And movement is what matters. Modern finance hides decay behind complexity. Numbers scroll across screens. Assets shift through layers of custody, proxies, and offshore structures. What looks stable on the surface can be hollow underneath. This is why reserve currency collapses are never obvious until after they happen. The British pound did not lose dominance on a single day. It lost it quietly, as debts accumulated and alternatives emerged. By the time it was obvious, the transition was irreversible. The same pattern is now visible again. Foreign holders of dollars are no longer behaving the way they used to. They are diversifying. They are hedging. They are preparing for a system where dollar dominance is no longer guaranteed. China's move was not the first signal. It was the loudest one so far. And it did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of preparation, years of building alternatives, years of reducing exposure, years of watching the same late-stage behaviors repeat. This is the moment in the cycle where history speeds up. The public always notices last. The media always explains afterward. The institutions always claim it was unforeseeable. It was always foreseeable. The silver drain of Spain, the pound's decline, the end of Bretton Woods. The pattern never changes. Only the instruments do. And once the flow of money reverses, once confidence begins to shift, the system enters a phase it cannot exit intact. This is not fear. This is precedent. In the next part, we'll move deeper into the Spanish collapse itself, because buried inside that story is a warning almost no one recognizes today. A warning about what happens when an empire keeps spending after the money stops coming home. When Spain's silver stopped coming home, nothing broke immediately. That is the most dangerous phase of decline. The phase where leaders, markets, and ordinary people convince themselves that the system is still working because the rituals continue. Taxes are collected, armies are paid, trade ships still arrive. On paper, the empire remains rich, but the money is lying. By the early 17th century, Spain had more silver than any empire in history, yet it was perpetually broke. Inflation surged, debts piled up. The crown declared bankruptcy again and again, not because silver was gone, but because it no longer circulated in Spain's favor. The metal flowed outward, not inward. Foreign merchants demanded payment in silver, then took it elsewhere. Spain imported goods instead of producing them. Why manufacture when silver could buy everything? The empire hollowed itself out while appearing powerful. This is the part modern audiences struggle to understand. Collapse does not come from scarcity. It comes from misalignment. When the currency that supports an empire no longer returns in exchange for real value, the system begins to cannibalize itself. Spain responded the way late-stage powers always do. It borrowed. Silver-backed debt replaced silver-backed strength. Each new loan assumed the future would resemble the past. Each war assumed tomorrow's treasure ships would cover today's costs. They didn't. Now return to the present, because the mechanism has not changed. The United States does not run on silver ships. It runs on treasury auctions. Every week, the government sells debt. Bonds are issued. Buyers step in. Foreign central banks, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, all absorbing dollars in exchange for promises. As long as that demand remains stable, the system feels normal. But when that demand weakens, everything else must adjust. This is where most explanations stop, because the mechanics become uncomfortable. When foreign buyers step back, interest rates must rise to attract replacements. Higher rates ripple outward. Mortgages, corporate debt, government borrowing costs. Everything becomes heavier. Spain faced the same pressure, just in a different form. As silver drained away, lenders demanded higher returns. Credit tightened, defaults followed. The crown responded by debasing currency, reducing silver content while keeping face value. It was an attempt to maintain appearances. Sound familiar? Modern debasement does not shave metal from coins. It expands balance sheets. It creates currency digitally. It calls inflation temporary and treats purchasing power loss as a side effect rather than a signal. The effect is identical. And just like Spain, the United States learned the wrong lesson from early success. Because reserve currency privilege delays consequences, it creates the illusion of immunity. For decades, warnings were dismissed. Deficits did not matter. Debt did not matter. Printing did not matter. Because the world kept buying. That is the trap. Reserve currency status does not eliminate limits. It delays them. And delay makes collapse worse when it finally arrives. China understands this better than most, not because it is clever, but because it has studied the ruins of past empires as a survival strategy. This is what separates empires that fall violently from powers that rise quietly. One reacts emotionally, the other prepares methodically. China did not wake up one morning and decide to challenge the dollar. It observed how every reserve currency ended. It watched how trust eroded. It watched how printing replaced productivity. It watched how sanctions turned money into a weapon. Then it acted the only rational way history allows. It reduced exposure. This is where the word dumped becomes misleading. Capital flight at this scale is never dramatic. It is staged, distributed, hidden inside normal-looking transactions. Spain's rivals did not announce they were draining silver. Britain did not declare it was replacing the pound with the dollar. And these transitions always occur beneath the surface, long before headlines catch up. That is why the $3 trillion movement matters. Not because of the number itself, but because of the direction. Money flows tell the truth before narratives do. For decades, the flow favored the United States. Dollars moved outward, but confidence pulled them back in through debt purchases, reserves, and reinvestment. Now the loop is weakening. And when the loop weakens, the system must compensate. Spain compensated by borrowing more aggressively, by raising taxes, by squeezing productive classes until they fled or collapsed. Economic vitality shrank while imperial commitments stayed fixed. This mismatch destroyed Spain from the inside. The United States faces the same contradiction. Global obligations remain, military presence remains, entitlement spending expands, debt grows automatically. But the external support system that made this possible is no longer guaranteed. This is the part no one wants to say out loud. The American standard of living has been subsidized by foreign demand for dollars, cheap imports, cheap borrowing, cheap consumption. Remove the subsidy, and reality asserts itself. China is not causing that reality. It is positioning itself for when reality arrives. This is why the framing of financial war is misleading. Wars are chaotic. This is surgical. Spain did not fall because its enemies attacked harder. It fell because they stopped financing its lifestyle. That is what is changing now. As foreign demand for treasuries softens, the burden shifts inward. Domestic buyers must absorb more debt. The central bank fills gaps. Balance sheets swell. At first, this feels stabilizing. Then inflation accelerates. Then rates rise. Then asset prices wobble. Then confidence cracks. This sequence has never failed to appear once capital flight begins. The most dangerous illusion is believing this process is reversible through policy alone. Spain tried reforms. Britain tried controls. None of it restored reserve dominance once alternatives matured. Because reserve currencies are not defended by force. They are chosen. And choices change when trust changes. China is not alone in adjusting. It is simply the most visible. Other nations are watching the same indicators: debt trajectories, monetary expansion, political paralysis, weaponized finance. They are not waiting for collapse. They are preparing for transition. That is how monetary empires end, not with panic, but with quiet coordination. The public always asks the wrong question. They ask, will the dollar collapse? History asks a different one. When did the world stop needing it as much? That moment does not appear on calendars. It appears in flows, in reserves, in trade settlements, in behavior, and by the time it becomes obvious, the advantage is already gone. In the next part, we will examine how modern systems disguise this transition and why the final stage always feels sudden, even though it was decades in the making. Because this is where late-stage empires make their final mistake. They confuse control with confidence. There is a moment in every monetary collapse that feels calm, not peaceful, not prosperous, just normal. This is the moment historians struggle to explain and populations fail to recognize. Prices are higher, but manageable. Debt is larger, but abstract. Warnings exist, but they sound theoretical. Life continues. This is the most dangerous phase because it convinces people that decline is exaggerated. Spain lived inside this moment for decades. By the time inflation was undeniable, the damage had already been done. Productive classes had shrunk, industry had withered, dependency had replaced resilience. The empire could still command armies, but it could no longer sustain itself. Modern economies experience this phase differently, but the psychology is identical. Today, inflation is discussed as a number, a percentage, something that can be adjusted with rates and statements. Historically, inflation is not a number, it is a signal. It signals that money is being asked to do more work than value can support. When silver flooded Europe, prices rose because money outpaced production. When dollars flood the global system, the same law applies. The scale changes. The mechanism does not. The United States has created extraordinary amounts of currency over a short period of time. At first, this stabilized markets. It prevented collapse. It bought time. But time is only useful if it is used to restore balance. Spain used time to spend more. That decision sealed its fate. Modern policymakers face the same temptation. Printing relieves pressure without forcing reform. Debt smooths conflict without resolving contradictions. Inflation distributes pain quietly without votes. It feels humane. It is corrosive. As inflation persists, something subtle happens. Trust erodes not in institutions, but in the meaning of money itself. People begin to feel that effort is disconnected from reward, that savings decay, that stability is an illusion. This is how social stress begins, not with revolution, but with disengagement. Spain's middle classes withdrew. Merchants shifted operations elsewhere. Talent left. Capital followed. This is the part of the story often omitted. Collapse accelerates when productive people stop believing the system will reward them. Now examine the present. Rising living costs. Asset owners protected. Wage earners squeezed. Savings eroded quietly. Younger generations priced out of stability. This is not accidental. It is the natural outcome of monetary expansion without structural repair. As confidence weakens domestically, it weakens internationally as well. Foreign holders notice the same signs. They see political paralysis, debt ceilings treated as theater, fiscal discipline as optional. They do not panic, they diversify. Diversification is the modern equivalent of silver drain. When Spain noticed silver leaving, it tried to mandate its return. Controls failed. Markets always find exits. Today, controls take different forms. Regulatory pressure, sanctions, financial surveillance. These measures may slow capital, but they cannot restore trust. Trust cannot be forced. This is why reserve currency transitions always feel sudden at the end. Not because the change happens quickly, but because the public becomes aware late. By the time Britain realized the pound was finished as global money, The world had already moved on. The dollar was already embedded, the infrastructure already built. Spain never saw its end coming. It believed power could command confidence. History proved otherwise. China understands this lesson. This is why it invested not just in currency, but in systems, trade settlement alternatives, physical commodity markets, infrastructure networks. Empires fall when they assume others have no choice. Choice is the only thing that matters. As alternatives mature, reliance fades, slowly, quietly, until one day the old system notices it is no longer essential. This is the phase we are entering now. The danger is not hyperinflation tomorrow. The danger is normalization of decline, a slow adjustment to less, framed as stability. That is how societies accept lower standards without revolt. Spain adjusted, Britain adjusted. Every empire adjusts on the way down. The illusion of control persists longest at the center. Peripheral signals appear first: currency swaps, trade agreements, reserve reallocations, commodity pricing experiments. None of these break the system individually. Together, they rewrite it. The $3 trillion movement is one such signal. Not decisive, indicative. It tells us something important. Those closest to the flows are no longer optimizing for yield. They are optimizing for exit. That shift in motivation marks the transition from growth to preservation. Once preservation dominates, the cycle cannot reverse. The final mistake empires make is believing that visibility equals understanding, that because markets are monitored, risks are contained. Spain saw its silver shipments. It knew how much metal existed. It still missed the point. What mattered was not quantity, but circulation. What matters now is not how many dollars exist, but where they want to be. In the final part, we will confront the question everyone avoids. What happens when the center can no longer rely on the world to finance its promises? Because history is clear about the answer, and it is never comfortable.